The Trump prosecution is not over. Alvin Bragg still meeting with witnesses in New York. We're going to go through that today. Remind ourselves about what he's trying to thread here, how he's trying to accomplish any criminal charges, given the fact that he's butting up against a statute of limitations problem. A couple different scenarios by which he could get that through. We'll explore some of those here shortly. But I want to talk through what this new witness is, who he is, what this story involves. It is this guy named David Pecker, CEO formerly of AMI, somebody who's also involved with the National Enquirer, and evidently he testified again. This is the second time he's been in front of the New York grand jury. And we're asking ourselves, what are we doing here? We spent a lot of time on this case. This is one of the weakest cases of all time. First of all, it's old. Other prosecutors have declined this. Other federal institutions, FEC and others, have declined anything to do with this. And so it feels like it's coming out of nowhere. And as we were piecing together and trying to reassemble what potentially Alvin Bragg, the DA, is trying to do here, we've been asking ourselves about the credibility of his witnesses, in particular, Michael Cohen. And we have all sorts of documents that show Michael Cohen is not only a convicted perjurer, but it sounds like he's lying about a lot of these other things because we have the documents. So as this is all percolating, it felt like the grand jury was coming to a screeching halt. They were not showing up or they were working on other cases. But then all of a sudden, boom, we fast forward, we wake up, and this guy, Pecker, has testified all over again. What's going on here? From the New York Times, they tell us, a former National Enquirer publisher testifies again in the Trump grand jury indictment proceedings. You see a picture of this photograph here, and they're calling him a key player as they're weighing evidence against Trump. David Pecker, the former publisher of the National Enquirer, also testified previously in January. He was seen there. The grand jury panel had been impaneled since the early last year, heard from at least 9 witnesses, including Mr. Pecker, now appeared twice. Unclear whether the grand jury took any action on Monday, but one of the people with knowledge of the matter said it had not voted on an indictment. Now, grand juries operate in secret. We already know that. Pecker was a key player in the Hush Money episode. He and the tabloid's top editor, they helped broker the deal between Stormy Daniels and Michael Cohen. Of course, they say it's Trump's fixer. And they write, ever since Trump predicted his arrest, all eyes have turned to the grand jury. This could be a 5-year investigation coming to fruition, but the timing is subject to quirks. This grand jury meets on Mondays and Wednesdays and Thursdays, so it doesn't typically hear evidence on Thursdays. Now, the timing of the indictment might also depend on availability. They tell us 16 of the 23 grand jurors must be present to conduct any business. Prospect of indictment has raised a number of concerns. They're focused on the payment. In recent weeks, Bragg's office signaled to Mr. Trump's lawyers that the president could face criminal charges, offered him a chance to testify. That's why Trump started getting communicative about this. They have a right to answer questions. Trump has denied all wrongdoing. He's posted several things on Truth Social. We're asking ourselves, is this guy going to talk about? We don't know. He might have damaging stories about Trump. Now, this is a fun sentence. For a brief time in October 2016, Miss Daniels appeared to have just that kind of story. Her agent and lawyer discussed the possibility of selling exclusive rights to her story of an encounter with Mr. Trump to the National Enquirer. She's trying to pitch that in October. That's a big, juicy story there, right before the November election comes up. Her agent and lawyer discussed potentially with this guy, we'll sell you this story, which would then promise to never publish it, a practice known as catch and kill. They were just going to send it over to him. He knows Trump, and then they're going to bury the story. But then the New York Times journalist had fun with this sentence, as you can see. In spite of that conspiracy, Mr. Pecker didn't bite. Instead, he and the tabloid's editor, Dylan Howard, decided that Mr. Cohen would have to deal with Miss Daniels' team directly. And when Mr. Cohen was slow to pay, Mr. Howard pressed him to get the deal done. And to prevent Miss Daniels from revealing her discussions about suppressing the story, we have to coordinate something, Mr. Howard texted. 2 days later, they transferred the money. That gets sent over. And That's the update from the New York Times. But CBS is also hearing some other things. Here's what they tell us. That the Manhattan grand jury is hearing from that key witness, basically the same story, but they get it from Trump's lawyers. They say by the end of the day yesterday, the Manhattan district attorney had not communicated with Trump's legal team. That's according to one of Trump's lawyers, Joe Tacopina. Susan Neck-Kelly's another one also said no communication from the DA on Monday evening. So more about David Pecker. He's the former CEO of American Media, was spotted entering the building where the grand jury was meeting, according to two sources. He played the key role, parent company, the catch and kill story. Trump was in Waco, Texas, and he's now explaining that he thinks that this is basically done. 2 hoax bomb threats were made in Manhattan, and a powder was also mailed to them. Welfare check on Hunter Biden and his crack dealer. A note said a big thing about Alvin was a problem. And then 177 former federal prosecutors signed on to a statement. Outraged about what's happening. And we're going to take a look at that story. Now, Kara Scannell is the individual who was able to grab that letter. You see this here. Says that 177 former prosecutors sign on to a statement to denounce attempts to intimidate Alvin Bragg, who Trump has repeatedly criticized for investigating his role in the hush money payment. Kara Scannell is a CNN correspondent. She grabbed the letter, which says the following. March 26, a statement by former federal prosecutors condemning threats of violence and attacks on the Manhattan district attorney. That's great. We all condemn violence here. We don't want anybody to threaten violence. In a democracy, they say we must protect prosecutorial independence and the rule of law. Huh. Let's see if their standard holds. They write, state and federal prosecutors must pursue justice without fear or favor to anyone. We must protect prosecutors from efforts to tempt or improperly influence them. Indeed, in democracy, it's critical to maintain prosecutorial independence. Oh, I guess from fear, from partisanship, from political attacks or anything like that. Huh. Independence and democracy. We don't want any improper influence. We want to pursue justice, right? We want to do those things. Not be partisan hacks. Let's carry on. In the wake of recent reports of attacks on the Manhattan district attorney, we must speak out. Okay. He says, they say 177 of these people who don't sign their names apparently, says former President Donald Trump, maybe they did, maybe it's on part 2, I don't know, it's not in this letter, has repeatedly issued vitriolic attacks on the DA and most recently made statements that can be construed as inciting violence. Is that true? He said that there could be potential death and destruction if he's charged by the Manhattan district attorney, whom he described as a degenerate psychopath and an animal. Which, you know, is colorful language, certainly. And an animal. He says this afternoon a death threat came in. Alvin, I'm going to eliminate you. Now, you can't ascribe that to Trump. It was delivered to the DA's office. Reports indicate that hundreds of threats have been made against the DA. Again, I don't condone any of that at all. I don't condone violence. I don't condone threats of violence. In fact, that stuff is illegal, by the way. So if you do make a threat to a prosecutor, that is illegal, and they will look into that, and there will be consequences for that. So I'm actively not giving legal advice, of course, but it's a caution, right? There are laws against threatening prosecutors. And we actually were speculating about this if Trump was getting close to that line. Now, calling somebody names, right, is not instigate, they're going to call it stochastic terrorism and all of that stuff. I think what he's talking about is sort of warning that what is about to happen is going to cause a constitutional emergency in this country, which I don't think is without merit. Take a look at what is going on throughout the rest of the world. What's happening in Israel? They're trying to make a judicial change and it's not working well. They have a constitutional problem they're working through, or whatever the nature of that conflict is, but it's not good. We have a similar situation in France. When you have constitutional disorder, there is potential death and destruction. It is not an invitation for it. He's warning that this is a stupid thing to do, to have a state level prosecutor take a bogus political charge, or try to fit a charge into a non-existent box and turn it into a narrative. They say hundreds of threats have been made against the DA. They say, as former prosecutors, we denounce the efforts to intimidate the attorney's office, and we call upon all to support and protect prosecutorial independence and the rule of law. Now, again, we don't condone any violence. I'm not interpreting what Trump is saying as condoning violence, encouraging the violence. But he is, I think, rightfully pointing out that this is not a joke of a case. I think a lot of people on the left or on the side who just scream about prosecution don't realize the ramifications that this would happen. It is like dividing by zero. It creates an illogical outcome in the United States, especially if he's running again. In a situation like this. Now, I'm not saying that you never prosecute a president, but I'm saying there are consequences for doing that, and you have to properly weigh those things. And if there are criminalities that come out and it deserves the prosecution, you got to make sure you're jumping into that with both eyes open, because you are opening a constitutional Pandora's box that might wreck the whole system, to be perfectly honest. And maybe that's what they want. So this is what they said. Now, I get irritated when they sort of get, they get angry when one side uses specific language, like inciting violence or like being a partisan rather than being an independent, prosecuting to pursue justice versus prosecuting for partisan ends, showing equal treatment to everybody rather than having political enemies or favoring or disfavoring political opponents, right? You see this language, these types of statements are chock full of what they claim they are or what they claim to be, and 177 people will sign on to a letter like this. Ooh. We are prosecutors. We care about independence and so on. We're very independent. Right. Now, as you know, the head prosecutor, the attorney general out of New York, Letitia Tishy James, uses very similar language, and nobody writes big letters with 177 prosecutors signing on to it when this happens.
Will you sue him for us?
Oh, we're going to definitely sue him. We're going to be a real pain in the ass.
I will never be afraid to challenge this illegitimate president.
We need to focus on Donald Trump. We need to follow his money.
What is fueling my soul right now is Trump.
This illegitimate president. I look forward to going into the office of Attorney General every day, suing him, and then going home.
She's very angry about this. We're going to be a real pain in his A. Did you hear that? That's kind of violence.
For us?
Oh, we're going to definitely sue him. We're going to be a real pain in the ass.
I will never be afraid to challenge this illegitimate president.
Illegitimate. She's saying that he has no basis to be the president. That's insurrectionary language. I'm curious if the FBI is identifying her. But the point is, this, you can find this all over the place. They say it all the time. I play here the montages quite regularly, but they do it all the time. It's okay to do it against the right. When Donald Trump says this is outrageous and somebody's acting like a psychopath, who he is kind of acting like a psychopath, quite frankly, it is nuts to think that this case is the one that you're going to make the whole country and very likely the whole world stop and pivot on a Stormy Daniels case out of your prosecutor's office, Alvin Bragg. Are you kidding us right now? Are you serious? So it's continual. And, you know, here's another one I found. I don't know what this one's about, right? They play both sides of the game. When she's running, she talks that language. Then when she seizes the position of power, then she comes out and does the solemn game. You know, we're prosecutors. We care about, I don't want to do this. I don't want to have to be indicting this or suing a former president and solemn vow. I got to uphold justice, blah, 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 blah. No, they're partisan hacks. That's it. So don't sign letters faking like you're concerned about the independence of your prosecutor's office when the prosecutor's offices have become politicized and weaponized.
5 witnesses and review of millions of documents that were submitted by Mr. Trump and others. I am announcing that today.
Yes.
We are filing a lawsuit against Donald Trump.
We will not allow this administration, this illegitimate president who sits in the White House. We're going to send a message by marching to the polls in our high heels and even backwards. And the days of this president are numbered because of the power of hate. Yes.
See, so it's just the same story. It's okay when they talk like this. It's okay when they're getting out there and calling people illegitimate and being aggressive. She is elected. She is the attorney general for the state of New York, and Alvin Bragg is right next to her. They're doing all the same stuff. So both of them have become partisan political hacks, but former prosecutors who have politicized the prosecutors' offices are going to suddenly get mad when Donald Trump starts kind of pushing back against them in a political manner. If they don't want to be politicized, then don't be political. You're politicizing the whole system by prosecuting Donald Trump, and it's not going to stop there. But they don't care. Now, we've had questions about this. Can Alvin Bragg actually do anything? I don't want to spend a ton of time on this here, but remember the charge that we were speculating they might be trying to squeeze through was section 175.10, falsifying business records in the first degree. And when we looked up the Georgia, we'll get to Georgia in a minute. When we looked up the New York statutes, we were asking ourselves about what level of felony this was in the state of New York, and whether it even was a felony, and how it became a felony, and whether Alvin Bragg is running out of time. And one of the questions was, what prompted this new reinvestigation to bubble back up again? And maybe it's that Trump actually announced his run for presidency. Maybe something else popped up that would toll the statute of limitations. And as a general rule in New York, the statute of limitations is 2 years for a misdemeanor, 5 years for a felony, generally speaking, right? There's all sorts of contingencies that extend it and make it change. But that's the general rule. And so you just ask yourself, wait a minute, what year is this? What year is this? Okay. And all this stuff took place back in 2016. How far back can we go? And so the one argument would be that it would be any crime that was March 2018 or more recent, because that would put it within the 5 years, right? Something more recent. It could be a more recent crime. Or it's not. It is actually a crime from prior to March 2018. And there's some mechanism by which the statute of limitations is told. In other words, if you get charged with a crime in New York and they don't prosecute you in 2 years, let's say a misdemeanor level DUI, they wait 2 years and 1 day and then they charge you because their blood results came back late or something. They don't get to charge you. Clock ticks, it expires, you're done. 5 years for a felony. So if this was a 5-year statute, clock has expired. Game is over. So what are the theories that allow the prosecutor to continue to play this game? Well, one might be that you could use this concept of saying there was not any reasonable due diligence, or there was reasonable due diligence that was done in trying to find this crime, but they couldn't find it for some reason, right? Something was hidden, something popped up. And so any time that there was this window where they couldn't have found the truth with reasonable due diligence, you exclude that from the clock. It just gets extracted from the calculation. And so we don't know what the dates are or whether they're trying to use that. But two other, maybe better examples of how they could potentially extend the statute of limitations would be if they could exclude the time of those 5 years, the time that Trump was not in New York City. So if all the time that he was in Florida, all the time that he was in Washington, D.C. or out of the country, if they literally went on a calendar and calculated the dates and said, okay, from 2016 all the way to 2023, we can take that full length of time and then subtract the times that Trump was not in New York and subtract that. Now, there's no real basis for any of this, as far as I can tell. It's all untested because this is all applicable to the president and it's a complex legal issue. But there's another concern about whether you could even toll the statute of limitations for the entire presidency, right? All that entire 4 years that Trump was in the White House. Is it possible to toll those 4 years? So you subtract the 4 years from the entire calculation, and would that put him back within the statute of limitations? We don't know. But I was reading a little bit more about this when I was assembling this mind map, and my understanding is that there's some basis for this, that there's a dissent by Judge Alito in the case of Trump versus Vance. And Alito is agreeing with that. He says, actually, the presidency might toll the statute of limitations for criminal prosecutions in various states around the country. So we'll look into that if that becomes relevant as this continues forward. But that's how this could potentially continue on, right? That's how they could theoretically prosecute that, even though it is outside the statute of limitations. And so before we move on, now Trump, even if this New York prosecution is stalled and dead, there are still two major attack vectors that I think are higher priority in terms of concern for potential charges. We'll talk about those, one out of Georgia and one out of the special counsel's office. But before we get there, Trump was responding to some of this. He actually was on with Sean Hannity, and he was asked about all of these prosecutions. Mr. President, how does it feel to be potentially indicted out of New York?
Great to see you again.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you for doing this. As reported, as you know, you're facing a lot of legal challenges. In your opinion, does this help you or hurt you in terms of your chances to win in 2024?
Well, if you listen to the fake news media, it helps. Because they're all saying it's a scam. Even people that don't like me are saying this is a terrible thing to do for our country.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it helps or hurts. I can tell you, in my opinion, it's a new way of cheating on elections. It's called election interference. What they're doing is, if they can't win at the ballot box, because I'm leading everybody by a lot in the polls, for every Republican, frankly, and every Democrat by a lot, including Biden by a lot. And they can't beat you that way. They're going to do this kind of stuff. This has never been done like this before in the history of our country to this extent. People are pleading with the prosecutor, don't do it, don't do it, it's wrong. Even Democrats, even people that traditionally are not exactly my fans are saying, don't do it, because I didn't do anything wrong. I did nothing wrong.
Let me ask you this then.
Now, we're going to go back to that point. He talks about leading in the polls, and we'll take a quick look at what's going on with DeSantis here in a short second, because Megyn Kelly had an interesting take on this. But some interesting things here from Donald Trump saying,
You, in terms...
Listen to the fake news media, it helps. Because they're all saying it's a scam. Even people that don't like me are saying this is a terrible thing to do for our country. I don't know whether it helps or hurts. I can tell you, in my opinion,
I think it helps him if he is indicted. And if he's not indicted, I think it helps the Democrats. I think the left will be very agitated if he is not indicted. Now, the Democrats and the people who want to take Trump out have to be very careful about which one goes first, because if they're going to take a swing at the king, they best not miss. And they've missed many, many times. And this is the next big one. Right? He's gearing up for another run at this thing. He's in the middle of it. And if they don't stop him on this one, he may win this again. And boy, oh boy, they're not going to be happy about that. So it's all eggs in the basket. They've got to pick what to do here. And if the New York prosecution is coming to a little bit of a putter, then where else can they focus? And so we see, we'll get to Georgia and to the special counsel, both of those continual prosecutions in a short minute. But when I was listening to Megyn Kelly, I was seeing that she had a very interesting take on Trump and what Trump said about being in charge in the primary. And here's what she said. about Ron DeSantis. She said Ron DeSantis is afraid. I'm just going to put this out there. He's afraid. Whoa.
He's not going to get a pass.
Let's listen.
I will say for the record, we asked DeSantis to come on the show. He has not said yes. And I find that very interesting. You know, I love Piers Morgan. He's a pal of mine. But why would you go sit with the British guy and not come on this show? And I do think there's a reason for it. And I will venture to say he's afraid. I'm just going to put it out there. He's afraid.
Content warning coming up. I forgot. This one's extra spicy. Content warning. Earmuffs for the kids out there.
Because he knows the kind of interview that I would give him. He's not going to get a pass. We're not there to rub elbows with these guys who may or may not be president and inure ourselves in their good graces. The reporters need to remember that. The relationship is supposed to be adversarial. For the love of God, these journalists should show it. I don't give a shit if you've fallen in love with DeSantis or Trump for that matter. They're not your friend. Your friend is your audience, is the truth. Grow a pair. Your business is not to be loved. It's to tell the truth. Respect is what you want. Respect will get you an audience. Love is for pundits who just want to say the nice, sweet nothings that people want to hear. The whole thing is bass-ackwards. It upsets me. I will say for the record, we asked DeSantis.
Woo! Extra spicy from Megyn Kelly. And I love that. I would love to see more journalists actually ask hard questions and pin people down. It's like patty cake all the time with these people. And she is extra fired up. And I'd like to see Ron DeSantis go on there. I'd like to see Trump go on there and get some actual truth from these people, because it's a lot of copy and paste journalism out there, you know, and she considers herself a journalist. I don't consider myself a journalist at all. I don't know, you know, what her entire framework is for her theory on, you know, ethics and morality and what a journalist's mission statement is and all that stuff. You know, I was not born in that world or lived in that world. But the fact is that we talk all the time here about copy paste journalism and about the games of patty cake that everybody just plays around. Oh, you're a great governor. Okay, you're a great interviewer. You know, they just laugh at each other and just sort of, you know, play games. And that's what we're tired of. And Trump, for all his faults that he may have, he still will engage. And Megyn Kelly is calling DeSantis out. So if there are anti-Trumpers out there, right, if all of the DeSantis people and all of these other people want to actually make a mark in this and deviate the Trump train early in the primary, they've got to start making headways with people like Megyn Kelly, who's not a Trumper. Okay, she's not a Trumper at all. So it's very interesting how this is shaping up. Now, we'll continue on. Here we see that there are other attack vectors for the former president, Donald Trump. Georgia is one of those. You see that as this goes on, we have talked a lot about this case, but I just want to refresh our recollection on this because Trump is not done. I actually think this is probably a bigger threat than the other New York case. I think Georgia is a bigger threat. Remember, this one we've talked a lot about with Emily Kors. She was the grand juror who had some of those weird conversations. She said this when she was on CNN.
Emily, thank you for coming on. I do want to say off the top, as you and I just discussed, but for everyone to know, you are somewhat limited in what you can discuss under the judge's orders as of now. But we do know, of course, one of the biggest questions remaining for everyone that wasn't in that jury room with you is how many people are in trouble here? What can you tell us about how many people you recommended as a group to face indictments?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. And I'm hesitant to speak to something that the judge made a decision not to share. I don't know if everyone's aware of this, but there was a hearing about what parts of the report should and should not be published in its various forms, and the sections that were removed were consciously chosen to be removed. And I don't want to say I have better judgment than the judge. Okay, so what she's talking about was the partial grand jury report. We went all the way through that, and we're getting closer and closer to a final ending of this investigation. And some of the evidence that they were able to reveal, my understanding is there was some final witnesses that were presented. And some of the evidence that they were able to dig out was, of course, the Trump to Raffensperger phone call where he called the Secretary of State and said, find the votes.
We also had another phone call by Trump to the Georgia House Speaker calling for a special session. And then we had this phone call from Trump to a Georgia investigator asking about signature matching, right? These are the actual phone calls. So this is a little bit different than what we heard in New York. Here, we've got some actual evidence, right? It sounds like they've got Trump on the phone. Now, they're considering RICO charges was the last thing I heard. CNN was reporting that, and using this to go after kind of a conspiracy type of investigation with multiple co-defendants, looking at solicitation of election fraud and other false statements. Now, this grand jury, my understanding, is a special grand jury, so they're going to finish this, and the next panel is probably going to be sworn in early May. So we've got a little bit of a hiatus on this one. And then all of the findings from the special grand jury would then be rounded up and then presented to the next grand jury in early May. Trump right now is fighting to get the final report not released. And I think that ruling is going to come out any minute now, basically any day now. This was the partial report that they did release. We went through this in a prior show, but very briefly, you can see there wasn't much here. It was 9 pages, and most of it was just redacted out. So you can see page 1 here, and then we'll just fast forward. We get a little bit. They say thank you to everybody, page 2, and then fast forward, boom, we're on page 8. Okay, so where's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? We get to the conclusion. That's it. And we get, a signature page. That's it. So there's not much more. They're going to be releasing those other pages. Trump's team is trying to fight those other pages from coming out, and then we'll see where that goes. But this was also the case where Rudy Giuliani was making presentations to the various legislatures. We also had Lindsey Graham made a phone call, if you remember, and he got asked about that. And so I think there's actually more evidence in this one. We don't have statute of limitations issues. We don't have old declinations of prosecutions. These are all fresh. These are all 2020 charges. And this prosecutor is on this. She's been on it for months and months and months. They've got 75 witnesses who came through there. And we know that significant indictments are coming. So we'll keep our eye on that in Georgia. And then lastly, we've got the special counsel. And as we were refreshing our recollection on this, we wanted to go back through the scope of the special counsel's charges. And this was the original appointment order that came out from Merrick Garland. And if you see here, there's a lot. It says special counsel can conduct an investigation into a bunch of things. 1, lawful transfer of power, anything about January 6, anything relating from January 6. We have a whole nother portion of this, which is the classified materials, the classified documents matter. And then 4th, we get anything else, any other federal crimes arising from the investigation into these matters. So the special counsel has a lot that they can dig into. I basically broke that up into 4 categories you see here. The Mar-a-Lago documents, classified materials. I think the Biden documents diminish that pretty significantly because, he's got his own problem. Then we've got the January 6th insurrection. I think they might try to connect that to the Proud Boys statement, stand back and stand by. We've got all the 2020 election interference stuff. Basically anything before, what the heck? Basically anything before, where did my mind map go? It just went away. Anything before January 6th, anything after January 6th, not directly connected to the January 6th event, could theoretically be charged. And the special counsel is working hard on this. He's already gotten a number of witnesses sort of taken care of. He got the executive privilege broken to Trump's former chief of staff. So Trump has a lot of exposure here. He's got his chief of staff has no basis to not talk to the special counsel. Same thing happened with his attorney, his defense lawyer, Evan Corcoran. The attorney-client privilege has been broken due to a crime fraud exception. Mike Pence and Donald Trump are trying to stop Mike Pence from having to testify. Trump says executive privilege. Don't think that'll hold given what happened with his chief of staff. And then Pence is talking about legislative immunity for being the Senate president. And then the final big thing that's happening right now is Representative Scott Perry. And he has his cell phone records. He was ordered to disclose all of those to the DOJ. That's on appeal now. And we're asking whether there's going to be a separation of powers issue between the judiciary, the special counsel, through the executive branch, ordering the legislative branch to turn over his cell phone records. So it's a full-on assault, and you can see this would have really, really consequential ramifications. New precedent, right, for executive privilege with presidents, new precedent for attorney-client privilege, for vice presidents, for Congress people. It's a lot. So even though New York is wrapping up, I think Trump's exposure is only escalating, actually, and it's looking worse for him because all of those privileges are breaking down. So we'll continue to follow, of course. We'll see how this unfolds. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for sharing this with your friends and family. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the next one.